Welcome to the Sandersonian Institute of Cosmere Studies, where there's always another secret.
Welcome back, everybody, to the Sandersonian Institute of Cosmere Studies. Time for another episode. This week we are doing episode 5, focusing on the Well of Ascension, book 2 of Brandon Sanderson's Mistborn series. Today is May 14th, 2018, and we are excited to be here. As always, I am joined by my two co-hosts, Jordan and Amy.
Hello.
Hello.
And before we get started, anything exciting going on in your lives? What's happening? What's the story, the news, the sitch?
I scared small children on Saturday night. That was fun with my Toph eyes.
I do that on a regular basis.
Oh, I didn't even think Wytoph was scaring everyone. I forgot about the
soulless
soulless pupilless eyes. Yeah, that's freaky.
Yeah, it was scary for it. I'd look over people and little kids would like walk and creep away, and I'm sort of going, "Oh, it's the eyes." And I'd look away and I'd be like, "Hi, I promise I'm not scary. There's Ariel right there. I'm with her. We don't bite."
I have a friend who doesn't have legs and me who doesn't have pupils. Sleep well, kids.
Well, she had legs. She was the pink dress. So she
okay.
Okay. So. I have a friend who did this amazing cosplay of it was a Jawa carrying a giant pouch on its bag, and BB-8 was in the pouch. And
was that Ep005?
Yes, it was.
It was awesome.
It was absolutely phenomenal because her body was actually inside of the BB-8, and she'd created this puppet animatronic something Jawa, and the kids would all run up and hug it because it was their size.
I know, it's so cute.
But
yeah. No. I mean, let's see. Over the weekend, I did this cool thing where I got tickets to BlizzCon.
I did that same thing.
Hey.
I didn't.
Oh, that's a shame.
I have small children. It's okay.
Well, now I feel like a jerk.
I don't. I feel wonderful.
It's okay. Someday when you guys get tickets, I'll be like, get another one. And then, but anyway.
They're hard to get.
I know. That's why I'd make it.
We had, 5 of us for 2 days getting tickets, and we only got 1 set?
Yeah. So we're still on the open market looking for 2 more tickets, trying to get in. So
listeners, if you magically have 2 more tickets...
and love us very much.
No, you don't need to love us. Just, remember
like us slightly.
Yes.
Tolerate our existence.
Any of them. And we'll be happy to take them off your hands at fair market value.
So yeah, BlizzCon, I'm looking forward to that. That'll be fun. As for me, the biggest thing is tomorrow's my birthday.
Yay!
And I'm excited. I won't tell you how old I am because that just makes me sad. And so, but before we get started, we want to thank our sponsors. The show is directly supported by our listeners via Patreon. If you want to help out the show, we would love your help, of course. You can visit our Patreon page at www.patreon.com/Cosmere Studies. At Patreon, we post each episode as well as a few other things that just sort of come to mind, including our 6-7, which is a list of 7 pieces of content every 2 weeks that we come across and we just think this is something cool to share. We typically try and have 1 or 2 things that include Cosmere-based things, but it doesn't always have to be Cosmere-related. So, with that, should we go ahead and dive in, or?
I guess so. There's a lot to cover.
So before we get started, there is a lot to talk about. And so in the Cosmere, I mean, it's huge. It's enormous. It's cosmic. But for the first several episodes, we're basically going to be going through, as we've been doing the past few weeks, and focusing on individual books, talking about events, talking about characters, that sort of thing. And then once we've gone through and done that, we're going to dive into more specific topics, diving a little bit deeper into those things. And we'll try and do that moving forward, interspersed throughout the year as we come up with ideas, as news comes out, as Brandon reveals things. But for this episode especially, this is going to be one of those where we're focusing specifically on a book and the events in that book, this time being The Well of Ascension. So where do we want to start? I mean, because this is...
Do we want to do characters again like we did for Final Empire?
I think that's a good idea. So from the original book, we've got our original crew, except
Minus
of course
one.
we're missing our fearless leader, and somebody else has sort of stepped into that role almost by default. Some people aren't entirely happy about it.
Ellen.
Yep.
Ellen Venture.
Ellen's addition to the crew is a fun one, because it brings out different sides of different people's personalities, and like you said, it's not everyone is happy about it.
Right.
Yeah.
Particularly Doxson is not a fan of Ellen Venture, because essentially what they've done is they've overthrown the nobility and then put a noble on the throne.
Yep.
And so
Which is not what they had planned at all.
Yeah, I mean, and we discussed that the past two episodes, discussing the fact that Kelsier's plan would have failed had they stuck through it. But it's also, we talked about that the Doxson is horribly biased against the nobles and can't see the good through it, and he tries, like you see it, like he never is openly hostile to Ellen.
Correct.
Because Doxson is, at his heart, a facilitator. But he can't get rid of it. He can't get rid of all that pain that he...
There's a few times that it's commented, like, when they're in the same room, like, the tension level just goes up, or it's just, like, everybody gets a little more stiff because they're both in there and they don't get along.
Yeah.
Right.
And it's not even, like, they get it at each other. It's just the tension. Everyone knows. It's the open secret. And... they even, like, have times where, I can't remember, there's some scene where, like, they, like, are having friendly conversation, and they're being openly friendly towards one another, but it's one of those, ha, buddy, yes, comrade, isn't this good, pal?
Yeah.
Like a middle school dance or something.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so actually, that brings up an interesting point. So they've overthrown this empire that stood for 1,000 years. And this is kind of an interesting take that Brandon has done, because so many stories, there's this build-up, and you're fighting the evil overlord, and you finally overthrow him, and the credits roll, and everyone's happy, and they live happily ever after.
Dun, dun, dun. It's wonderful.
This book starts a year later.
Yeah, it's interesting. He starts the first book after the revolution failed and we're in the dystopia, and the second book starts with, all right, guys, now we got to actually run this kingdom that we horribly overthrew.
So what sort of government have we set up here?
It's a constitutional democracy or something?
Constitutional monarchy.
Very similar to the way England is run these days, pretty much. Except that the king has more power in there.
Yeah, this king has more power. He's not just his figurehead.
Yeah.
But you also can't depose a king in the British monarchy.
So who is part of this ruling council?
There's 16 ska, and there 8 noblemen.
It was skas, merchants, and noblemen, I believe, were the divisions they went through.
So
the
essentially
merchants technically, it seems like the merchants were pretty much mostly ska, though. Or were they not? Or I guess
lesser nobility as well.
Okay.
So,
I guess the character we focus on in that area is a ska. Or he was. Anyway, it's fuzzy.
Yeah. No. Yeah. So we've essentially got three classes. We've got the working class, we've got the merchants, and we've got the nobility, and they're all working together on this council. And Elend is running things, but he's doing a pretty poor job.
He's using passive voice, and he's not as commanding as
he's an idealist.
Mm-hmm.
And he's trying to run things as an idealist would. He has certain ideas of how things should work, but it's not that easy to jump directly from a dictatorship that's been running for 1,000 years to, hey, you can do whatever you want.
One of the things I find interesting, we discussed how Final Empire can stand on its own if you want. Mm-hmm. The second two books, and particularly anytime we get into Ellen's head, we have a lot of chapters that deal with a running theme of what it is to be a leader. Mm-hmm. And sort of this running lesson of you have to be the leader the people need at the time. And in this, at least
and
in
not
the
the
first...
leader they deserve? Or... Wait,
well,
sorry.
No, but so, like, I'd say it, like, in the first half of the book, the problem is Ellen is trying to be a good and just leader in a time of upheaval. That at a time when people aren't looking for good and just yet. That's not a luxury they have. They're looking for stability. And so they need him to be more decisive and not be giving up so much power to the council. The problem isn't the way he set up the government, it's the fact that he set it up that way too soon. He's trying to get a baby to walk before it can crawl.
It's sort of like my freshman year of college. You know, I got to school and I was excited to be on my own. I was not ready to be on my own. I crashed, and it was just sort of, I had too much freedom. I hadn't learned to self-regulate.
I had an 8 a.m. class like every day, and I must admit I didn't make it to it all the time. It was rough my freshman year.
And so,
in that regard.
But yeah, so, you know, ironically enough, they think Ellen is a good person, but essentially he was put on the throne by default because he was he was the noble who was friends with the people who overthrew the government. Mm-hmm. And then the fact that he was the son of Strath Venture sort of helped his case as well because it was the most powerful house.
To be fair to Ellen, he had done his studying in the previous book, and we saw that. And point in fact, when they overthrew at the very end of the book, he gave, like, he was talking to the crew. He's like, no, you can't go about killing the nobles because this will, like, and he laid out, like, he understood the theory of what happened next. He understood the immediate aftermath of the revolution being the most crucial part. He just he needed to take the reins. He didn't.
He was a scholar. He wasn't a leader.
Yeah.
He knew academically this is what should be, but he wasn't able to actually put it in place and do it in an effective way. And that's why another character was introduced.
Quick question, because we're going that way.
Okay.
How many, is this your third read for second?
This was my, I got halfway through on my second read, and so this would be my third for the first half, and then second for the second half.
So this was my second, and I remember my first read through, because we were obviously moving to Tindwyl. That I always want to throw an unnecessary N in there for some reason. The first time I did not like her at all and found her very grating.
Oh, I loved her.
In your face and everything.
It wasn't so much the in the face. It was, I don't know. I just didn't like her.
Well, Ellen was our friend, and she was messing with our friend.
Ellen wasn't necessarily my friend at that point. I don't know. Ellen's a character I had to warm up to, frankly, on my first read. Because
Had you warmed up to him yet?
No.
Okay, so you hadn't even warmed up.
Yeah,
to him.
I just didn't like her. I didn't like how bossy she was. I just don't like bossy people. They annoy me.
I'm glad you said people, not women.
I don't know bossy women. I'm horribly single. No, but and so I just didn't like how bossy she was, and I do think bossy is the right term. But in the second read through, she treated him like a child. Yeah. But knowing where she was going and where the character was going, the second read through, where I can suddenly see her knowing her backstory and knowing her that this is tactical for her.
Right.
And she's a mom.
Yeah.
She knows how to deal with.
She's not just a mom. She's like mega
crazy
mom.
Yeah, so I'm sitting there going, yeah, I need to look at her a little more and go, yeah, I need to channel a little more Tyndall with my children.
Yeah, so let's talk about that a little bit. Okay,
No
so
negotiations. You don't negotiate with terrorists, Amy.
I've been trying to not negotiate with the 3-year-old.
Did you say terrorists or terrorists?
I said terrorists.
Okay. Sorry, just because the context we're talking about. So, okay.
You definitely don't negotiate with terrorists.
Oh,
so,
goodness.
Let's talk about Tyndall, though. So what is her background? Where does she come from?
She was a breeder, and that's a horrible, horrible, horrible fate. Where she was 14 or 15, I think, when they started her.
But it wasn't just that she was a breeder. Because they purposely got her
was a
in.
Plant.
Yeah, she volunteered for this because.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the terrorist breeding programs. What was the point of them? What was the Lord Ruler trying to do?
It was to breed out Furukumi, which is what the Lord Ruler was trying to do. But she was snuck in because she's a Furukimist.
Yeah. So essentially the Lord Ruler was trying to... he realized that if there was somebody who had both Furukumi and Allomancy, they could do essentially the same things that he could do. Because he was able to compound, he was able to tap all these different abilities because he had access to 2 different magic systems.
Yep.
And he did not want that to happen to the population. In fact, he's decided, I don't want anybody else to have Furukumi. And so he essentially tried to breed it out. He, if there was a man who had it, they were castrated.
Well, it seems like it was because it happened to Caesar when he was really little, so I don't know if they would have even known that he was.
No,
he had
right.
it.
But essentially, they're just trying to breed these traits out and to a degree, it almost completely succeeded. There were only a few in secret, the Synod, who had access to these. The Keepers. Had access to all of these abilities.
It succeeded so well to the point that I think Caesar, and I think it was in this book, he commented on how they thought they had succeeded. They thought they had gotten rid of all Furukumi, and they were starting to move on to trying to make them more docile, make them and breed better servant qualities into them. And they weren't focusing as much on the Furukumi side.
Right.
And it's sort of implied that's how they sort of snuck Tyndall into this program.
Right.
Because they weren't looking for that. They were looking for
and so Tyndall, who is a ferrochemist, suddenly, to put it kind of roughly, she's shooting out babies who have these ferrochemical genes.
I mean, she had like 17 kids, right?
20.
20.
Jeez. Yeah, as someone who's given birth to 2, I'm like, ooh!
You don't want to do that times 10?
And the other thing is, she wasn't that old.
No.
In other words, they basically kept her pregnant the entire time she's in this program. And
which is awful on your body. It's so terrible.
Yes.
And to start that young is terrible too. Because it can have horrible complications with pregnancies and babies when you have them that young.
And that's one of the things we've you and I have talked about this sort of outside of the show, but it really makes Tyndall's relationship with Caesar very fascinating. Because Caesar, he has these issues. He sees himself as less of a man because, well, he has been, literally emasculated. And, and so he's thinking, but he's loved Tyndall ever since they were children. And, but he thinks, I'm half a man. She could never want me. And she says, I've had plenty to do with men. I'm done with that. I don't want that. And so the relationship is purely emotional and mental with very little physical beyond just holding hands and closeness.
It was very interesting how they spoke of one another when the other one wasn't there, because Vin hated her because she was riding Ellen just to hell and back,
Right.
So naturally, Vin didn't like her, and
Vin's just a little bit protective.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and conspiratorial and deadly.
Right.
But what I loved was Sayzed sort of explained her background, and he's just like, she's the strongest woman I know, and just sort of really, just impressed upon Vin, like, no.
Well, and saying this to Vin, who is incredibly powerful herself.
Pretty dang strong, yeah.
Yeah, and just, just explaining to her all the reasons that she should be admired. And then when she talked about Sayzed, it's always in these glowing terms of, like, why aren't you leading the Synod? And just...
You would do a better job.
Yeah. And, I don't know, I found, like, I found the relationship far more interesting this time. Now, and it probably also helps that I was listening to the audiobook and could think about it more than when I'm reading. I just sort of react and keep going because there's something else that's going to happen.
See, it's interesting. I've been listening to the audiobook this time too, just because it's easier for me to, because we're trying to cram a lot into a certain amount of time, and it's just easier to get through all of them.
You're saying Brandon's books are big and
just
full of stuff?
And there's a lot of them.
Yeah, his books are the double-stuffed Oreos of the literature fantasy world.
And they're so wonderful.
His most recent one was 1,300 pages long. I think that...
Triple-stuffed also exists.
But,
so big.
No, but I do find myself kind of disagreeing a little bit with the narrator's interpretation of certain lines. I'm just like, that sounds more confrontational than I would have read, and stuff like that. It's just very interesting.
See, I'm only reading in the paper.
And
I haven't done the audiobook.
I might actually end up going back to that just because I do miss having my own
your own voice reading it in your own
exactly. And so okay, so we've talked about Tindwyl and Sayzed. Now there is one thing other than being terrorists, they share one very important quality, which is they're both keepers. So the keepers, as we've said, are ferochemists. So, do one of y'all want to sort of give us an overview of how exactly feruchemy works?
I mean, sure. We got a preview of it in the previous book, as obviously it was necessary to understand at the end what the Lord Ruler was doing, the big reveal. But in this one, we got a bit more of a detail as to some of the other additional powers we got, because we already knew speed, strength, and copper, which is just the memory stuff. And those were the main ones we learned in the previous book. They're able to store an attribute, and while they're storing it, they don't have as good an access to it, and then they can tap it for later for greater effect. So whereas allomancy, you eat a metal, you burn it, and then the power's gone, theirs is neutral in that they store it and then they use it at a later time, and they can change how strong the effect is with how much they tap it.
I think part of the origin of this, as we've talked about, I think last time, was Brandon's bouts of insomnia.
Yeah.
Where he'd be up hours into the night where he didn't want to be, and then he'd be tired during the day. And just the concept of, I wish that I could store up all of this wakefulness and then tap it later on.
Point in fact, that's one of the ones we discover later on, that bronze is wakefulness. We also learn the coolest one, in my opinion, which is storing weight in iron, because before iron, we had seen how he's weak when he stores pewter, he's slow when he stores steel, he can't see well when he stores tin.
So storing is always a detriment.
Yeah, and then with iron, when he goes off with Marsh to the conventicle of Saren, which is one of those, I don't know what a conventicle was, so...
Brandon. It sounds like a fancier word for convent.
It really does. That he just sort of jumps off a cliff, and then he starts storing weight such that his coefficient of friction with the air becomes enough of a factor that he slow falls like a feather would. And up until that, we hadn't seen that the tapping can be useful. And then suddenly we're like,
that's nice.
That's interesting that some of these can be useful when you're tapping, or when you're storing.
which is really interesting, and we see a lot of fun stuff with that in
The later one.
Era 2 stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, the other ones we saw in this one were
I've got a list in the show notes if you want to take a look.
Yeah.
So
Let's see,
first
gold,
off, we got
gold is health. And
Health was one.
Yeah, so copper is the one we probably see the most because
that's memories.
That's kind of Sazed and Tindwill's big thing. Sazed focuses on religions, and Tindwill focuses on biographies.
Mm-hmm.
So they can store memories, and essentially when they store a memory into their copper mind, they forget it, which I think is fascinating.
I feel like they almost have like a fuzzy. I thought they had like a fuzzy almost memory or something for part of the time.
What I
like
found
before
interesting,
they fully put in.
it was library science way before its time, because it's all about they have copper mines that are just indexes of their other copper mines.
Right.
Oh, that's right, they do.
And I just find that concept fascinating because I don't know if you've ever done programming. There's things called pointer variables that all they do is point to a spot to tell you to go look there. And they essentially have a computer system in their mind because it's this highly organized system so that any keeper can pass on some knowledge that they have to another keeper in this highly organized fashion.
But they have to read it to them.
Yeah, they recite everything, and they have to
recite.
Oh yeah, I think Sazed said it took like.
Put it into theirs.
Didn't Sazed said it took like 3 months or something when he first.
I think so to recite the entirety of everything. Yes.
Yeah.
Which that's a lot of information.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
But it was very cool that that way, and it became very important when they go to the conventicle because. I mean, we're not quite in spoiler territory yet, but the fact that he had to store the rubbing of Quan into his metal mind becomes a very important plot point.
Mm-hmm.
That's a plot point that it's interesting. I do want to discuss later because I don't quite.
We're probably gonna have to shove off a lot of the spoiler stuff till the next episode.
Oh yeah. Okay, so next is Pewter. Now, just like in Allomancy, Pewter deals with strength, but it's a little bit different. So what's the difference between ferrochemical pewter and allomantic pewter?
One hulks out, one just sort of expands what your muscles can physically do.
Yeah, because Sazed like normally looks kind of thin, and I think he even says that like his limbs are a little bit overextended because of his being a eunuch at a young age.
Well,
but
he
essentially later.
He essentially, during the fight at the end of the book, the Battle of Luthadel, he pulls off his robe. Well, he pulls off his robe, and he's essentially wearing what is referred to as a vestigial loincloth.
Yeah,
and he literally hulks out. And I'm imagining one of these, like something from an anime.
Yeah,
like one of these guys who has muscles where there should be no muscles.
Muscles on muscles on muscles.
Exactly.
I've got like a bajillion abs. No, but I do think there is one other difference because there isn't quite they don't have the upwards limit that an Allomancer really has with their strength, but the Allomancer, it enhances all their physical traits, and so it's also their balance and their litheness and their speed. Whereas a Feruchemist, it's pure strength. It doesn't give them
speed is a different. A lot of these attributes are different.
Yeah, and speed doesn't if you have a ferrochemical speed, it doesn't naturally make you more lithe. It just makes you faster.
Right. Which actually can take us right into the next one. So 10. This one is very interesting to me.
The fact that you store the senses...
1 sense per tin mine.
Yeah, and that's the thing, is you need a different tin mine for each sense with tin. When you're burning tin allomantically, you burn it and it enhances everything.
Yep.
That was another one that they showed the storing being useful. With Sazed on the battlefield and him storing smell so he doesn't get distracted by all the blood.
He was walking through a random village. He's like, I'm gonna gag if I get closer. So he's like stores a smell, and he's like, I don't want to gag when I'm going through here.
Yeah, it was that was an interesting one.
Well, and they delve into it a little bit more before a conversation he has with Tindwill, where she comes in and he barely recognizes her, and he can't really, she's speaking in a muffled tone. And then they actually sort of have a moment, and he stops storing because they've embraced, and suddenly
Yeah.
just the feeling of her being there rushes in around
He's like,
her.
I want to remember this. I want to get the full
Yeah.
sensation, not just the
Exactly.
muffled bit.
It's very, very interesting with that.
And then the next, of course, we mentioned gold, and so when he's storing this, he's constantly eating soup.
Yeah, he was
Because-
eating chicken soup.
And it's just like, okay, that's a fun little touch, Brandon. That was nice. That was good. I like that. We talked about weight, physical speed.
Yep.
Brass does warmth, which
Well,
I'm like, I could use that so often.
Let's stick with speed
Get
first,
cold.
because one of the things is when they're storing that, he says it's like he's almost moving through a thick gel.
Yeah, I
And
imagine everyone's done that in a pool where you try and like run in a pool.
And you just don't move anywhere.
Yeah.
And so
Yep.
I found that one interesting.
he also said that that's one of the hardest to store up.
Yeah.
And it's one that he could, because he essentially drains his entire metal mine going from the conventicle back to Luthadel.
And he's been doing it for like years, storing
Yeah,
it up.
that's the thing I found interesting, was the fact that Sazed, the way he lived his life, because he never saw himself as a warrior. So I imagine Sazed was the type of guy who at all times was basically storing strength and speed and all these things he didn't need at the moment. 'Cause he does, like, I do think he'd be the type to do that, just in case.
Right.
And then when we get to the final battle of Luthadel, and I think he says, he's like, I have years worth of strength.
Yes.
And by the end of the battle, he expends it all, and then there's just a pile of Koloss.
Yeah.
But that's the thing, is when you're fighting Koloss, that's the time to tap.
Oh
the-
yeah,
the
tap it all,
Pewter
tap it all.
Okay, now Brass, you were talking about warmth.
Yes. So that one,
Interesting.
he's in it's winter. I keep forgetting it's winter for part of the book.
Yeah.
And he's starts using the brass and because he's like, well, it's cold. And so, but other times he starts storing it instead.
Yeah, that's
And
another one that you can use storing beneficially as well.
Yeah, because you can use it to lower your body temperature, and so you can go through a hot place and start storing it to keep yourself cooler.
Yep.
And I'm always cold, so I would love that one. My toes are always super cold. My husband hates it.
And then, of course, zinc.
Mental speed.
Mental speed. I totally feel for this one all the time, especially when I was waking up with babies at like 3 a.m. and 5 a.m. And then just like your brain's just like in fog, and you're just like, I know I can think, but it's not working.
Well,
And
and I found that one interesting, where they were using it when Tindwyl and Sazed were doing their giant cram session, because they got to get it in before the final.
It's like speed reading and covering it all and stuff. Yeah, it makes sense. And then, of course, bronze, because they're pulling the all-nighter.
Yeah.
So.
Yep.
And then, of course, is the big one, adium.
Age.
Which, okay, so typically this wouldn't be all that useful, because it's essentially like a rubber band. If you store age for a while, you're old, and then you tap it, but then you revert back to your normal age.
Yeah,
But the Lord Ruler, of course, was able to sort of hack this. I think we can talk about compounding now, even though it doesn't really come up until Era 2 again.
Yeah. No, it was cool how you compound, where you basically, in the end, compounding, what you do is you charge a metal with a ferrochemical charge, and if you can burn that metal, you then give that amount that you'd normally tap. You're basically giving it an extra alchemical boost. And so what you essentially do is you sort of, like in the Lord Ruler's case, where he would store age in an adium mine, and then he would burn that adium. And so instead of getting the normal adium effect, which lets you see slightly into the future, he instead essentially gets to tap age, but he taps it with a little extra oomph, and so he gets more health, or more age than he gave up.
The fascinating thing about this, though, is how it reacted when his adamantium mines were taken from him at the end of the first book. Because essentially what happened is his body started trying to revert to its actual age, which is 1,000 years.
Yeah. Well, it was because
So
he had, if I remember, I think there's a word of Brandon explaining this somewhere, where he's talking about the fact that is the fact that he had been doing this for so long that it's a diminishing return when you do this, and so he'd been doing it for so long that he was constantly having to do it just to fend off Father Time, and so as soon as he couldn't do it anymore, his body just he was aging
he becomes
way
an
more
Indiana Jones villain.
Yeah, because he was
like Mother Gothel.
Yeah, he was aging more rapidly than everyone else was.
Yep. Until finally he's just this decrepit creature on the floor, telling Vin, "You've doomed us all."
And it turns out he was right.
Indeed. Oh boy. Okay, so we've talked about Farukami. Do we want to start looking at some of the other characters who sort of show up as major points, or do we want to talk about a couple of the interesting plot points and
I mean, I'd like to talk about Breeze's evolution in this book.
Let's talk about Breeze.
Yeah.
So we never got a viewpoint from Breeze in the first book.
No.
But we got impressions from the other crew members that Breeze is a better man than he lets on. Mm-hmm. And then in this book, we finally get a viewpoint from Breeze. And while he's still his boisterous and self-important self, you also see small details, like the fact that he is soothing everyone everywhere at all times, and usually for their benefit. Even small things like going through, and he was soothing I think it was timidity out of like some maids so that they'd be more likely to talk to one another, so
and have a good time after they're doing dishes or whatever else.
Yeah. And then when he goes and meets clubs for a drink or whatever, he's just like, what is wrong with me?
He's like, what am I doing this? I'm doing things for maids. I'm not supposed to have to worry about that.
Now, the thing about Breeze, though, is he's not just a better man than he lets on. He's a better man than he believes himself to be.
Yeah.
Because he does this so naturally. He's just constantly, how can I make this person feel better? How can I make this person feel better? How can I ease some suffering that this person's got? And it just happens naturally.
Yeah. I do think it's interesting because he implies with some of his comments that he didn't used to do some of these things. That being put in this position of authority is sort of what's made him start doing these things, which goes to the fact that goes back to everything Kelsier thought about all these people, that he thought that they'd make for good leaders, and for the most part they do make for good leaders. Some of them not as good as Kelsier would have originally hoped because for reasons, but yeah, like Ham didn't turn out to be as good a leader as Kelsier thought. He wanted Ham to be a general, but
Ham was a soldier.
Yeah, and he gets too invested in his soldiers' lives.
But the thing is, because of that, he's able to interact with them on a more personal level.
Yeah, but it makes him a poor general. He's a good guy to lead a platoon.
Small scale, yeah.
He's a good captain. He's a good.
But he's not a good general. Because
a good sergeant or a good captain, yeah.
Because a general's job is horribly, you have to sometimes know that I'm throwing away people's lives here, and he can't do that. That eats him up inside.
Which is Ellen's problem at first, but that's also what Tindwyl does for him. Tindwyl's relationship with Ellen, I absolutely love it because it's almost surgical the way that she manipulates him into becoming a better person, but it's not perfect. There are several times where she disagrees with him, and she's just wrong because other people say he is stronger than you believe. He's right more often than you think.
The parts that are funny is when he uses her lessons against her, and he's just like, "No, you don't get to speak to me like that." Except his voice doesn't crack like that, like he suddenly went through puberty, like I just did, apparently.
You're basically Well, it's especially even after he's deposed as king, he says to her, he says, "I may not be king anymore, but this is still my home, and you are still a guest here. And if you keep behaving this way, I am going to ask you to leave."
Mm-hmm. And I think she steps out of the room, and she's just like, "I'm just going to step out of the room for a minute." So
the thing that's interesting is you can tell she sort of has mixed feelings because she sees him stepping up, and she's just like, he's become the leader he needs to be, just a little bit too late.
That's the tragedy of Elend's character, is that he's the wrong leader, like, just long enough that it gets him deposed, and he's just good enough a man that he lets himself get deposed,
and he won't let them use any loopholes or anything. He's like, I'll point out that there isn't a loophole there. He is an
absolute idealist.
Can I cut in real quick with a different character that's important to a friend of mine?
Okay.
Because we're discussing the fact that he could have used a loophole to stay in power. I forget the loophole was the changing of the votes. That's what it was. Because people found out Set, like, okay, Set's not going to win. Can I change my vote to Penrod? And Elend realizes this is a loophole. None of them know this rule. And he looks over at one of my friend's favorite character, Norden the Obligator.
I love the Obligator.
If it were up to him, there'd be a trilogy about Norden the Bookkeeper. And for some reason, he
never trust a happy Obligator.
Yes, and that's my line to him all the time. I love that Vin does not trust him because he's friendly and he's smiling and all the things that would normally make you trust someone.
She's like, it's just wrong.
It's wrong. He's an Obligator. You can't trust him. Something's wrong with the happy Obligator, but he was happy. And you get the impression he really wasn't in it for, like, the religion or anything. He just really liked bookkeeping.
He just loves administration.
Job. He's like, I can do that.
Never trust a happy bureaucrat
who loves his job. What is wrong here?
I know. But he makes eye contact with Elend and gives him this understanding of, I won't tell anyone if you won't. And I love that moment of that eye contact with Norden because it gives you a glimpse into his character. He's smart enough to know what Elend's thinking, and
he also recognizes that Elend is still the better leader.
Yeah,
he would rather follow Elend.
But he doesn't actively push that. He lets Elend make the decision.
Yep.
And it was a cool he's a minor character. But I did find him very interesting to throw in, because he also shows that Elend's leadership style, where he doesn't throw away everything that was.
Well, it's also an interesting look into the Steel Ministry, because, again, the ending of the first book, they killed their god. Or Vin killed their god. And they're essentially just sort of left with no direction. And Norden says, you know what? Clearly, if he was killed, there's something wrong here. This guy looks like he knows what he's doing. He seems like a good man. I'll follow. And it was just like, it's a very interesting, because what happens in that situation when the entire priesthood, the entire government is based on a priesthood whose deity has fallen?
Chaos.
You've got chaos, and somehow Elend was able to prevent everything from descending into chaos. You see some of the other cities in
Book 3.
Well, in Book 3, and also from Justice Lacal's
and you just get references to things that have happened.
And it was horrible. So the fact that Elend was able to prevent that from happening in the biggest, most populated city in the entire empire, that speaks something of his ideals that he's been following.
Yeah, it's definitely... It's something everyone else discounts, that, Elend bumbled into things, is what every other leader talks about. And you see everywhere else.
Particularly Straff.
Oh, my goodness. Yeah. Let's talk about just the biggest piece of human debris in maybe all of Brandon's books.
Okay, so Brandon is really good at making sympathetic villains. We talked about it in Elantris with Wraithen. We talked about it in, even the Lord Ruler was sympathetic. I think in Strath Venture, Brandon just said, I want to make somebody that you can just know, okay, this is a horrible person. I want bad things to happen to them. They deserve it. Just nothing. There is no redeeming quality to Strath Venture.
There is no puppy this man won't kick. No, okay, so first of all, the fact that he uses the fact that he views like a 28-year-old woman as old is simultaneously deplorable and creepy. Like, it's amazing how you hit both of those things at the same time. He's
Barney
really
Stinson
good.
from How I Met Your Mother.
But evil.
Well,
but pure evil.
Okay, fine. There again with no redeeming quality.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the other thing, he's a combination of very shrewd and an idiot. Because, for example,
he's so self-assured that he doesn't think that he could be wrong.
Well, he's trying to manipulate Zane by offering him adium because he thinks Zane is addicted to adium. He thinks it's a drug,
which is so wonderfully ironic.
Oh yes, because when we find out in the end what's been going on, how how Straff's mistress, who is actually Zane's mistress or former mistress and healer, because Zane basically keeps making Straff think that he's poisoning him, and he never does.
Because he's like Straff is anticipating it, and that's your first take on it, is that Straff's anticipating it, so I need to keep it up so he doesn't suspect other things, but you don't know what that is until later.
Mm-hmm. So Straff spends his life manipulating people. He manipulates Zane when he's a child. He manipulates Ellen when he's a child. And so just seeing him get this comeuppance in the end, where you realize he has been played like a puppet.
The thing that's interesting, the thing I find interesting about him is he is very competent. He played some of the riskiest house war games ever existed, and he made all the right moves. Mm-hmm. What ends up being his downfall is he is very clever. The problem is he's so clever that he simultaneously sees things where there aren't and doesn't see things where there are. Mm-hmm. Because he thinks everyone's manipulative.
But he thinks everyone's dumber than him.
Yeah.
Yep.
But so he thinks everyone's manipulative, so he doesn't trust that Ellen is making good faith. But he also underestimates Ellen and doesn't think much of his Mistborn. And then and the thing I like about that entire scene of they go to Straff's camp is they are in his power when they go there. Mm-hmm. And then Ellen has formulated, with the best minds he has around him, a plan. He sat there, he talked about it with Breeze, he talked about it with Doxson. They have spies, they formulate a plan. He gets there, and then he realizes, no, I misread the entire situation in this plan. We're going to go the other way. We're going to threaten them. And he and Vin worked seamlessly in that scene without them making eye contact. All she could do was hear his voice, and he implicitly trusted her, as opposed to Straff, who trusts no one.
No one.
Yep.
Well, the other thing, speaking of which, that's the sort of tactic that Vin has been using her whole life. Is
it's a con.
Appear weak. Make them discount me. And then suddenly, and we were talking about it in the last episode, I can't remember what the scene was where somebody was talking about appear weak, and then just turn it around and just bully somebody.
It was Kliss. It was Kliss.
Yes, that's what it was. Where she, because she's just been hiding, and then finally you just see the flip, and it's terrifying. And in this same thing, Straff has been completely discounting her because she's been appearing weak. When she's
small and she's not stepping up and forceful. She's letting Len talk.
Not only that, she pretends to be clumsy when she's manipulating his emotions.
I'd forgot. She does, because she overdoes it, so he's obvious.
She lets him see that she's manipulating him.
And Elen, that's part of what makes Elen realizes that he's like, she wouldn't have slipped up like that.
And he catches a sort of half smirk on her face, and he's just like, oh, she's good.
It plays perfectly into, and the thing, since we seem to be transitioning a bit to Vin now, this book is all about Vin starting to put together the lessons Kelsier taught her. Mm-hmm. The first book was all about her learning to not just be her old self. This one's learning to become the heir of the survivor, even though she doesn't like the term.
it's not just that. This is where not only where she learns those lessons, but then she surpasses him.
Yeah. Well, so a couple of the moments that let you know, because one of the messages in this book is that Kelsier may be gone and he may cast a long shadow, but Vin is, in a very, very real sense, his daughter.
Yes.
And the moment that sealed it for me in this book that, she's got so much Kelsier to her, is when they discover Duralumin, which lets you do a super charge of
it's basically nitro.
She recklessly
nitro works, yeah.
When she's testing, she decides to test it out when she's chasing Zane one of the first times, which how wonderfully reckless of you.
Great timing.
And
which
then
is, again, Vin,
it's very Vin and Kelsier. We
Kelsier's
discussed
daughter.
just all their poor decision making they had in the first book that almost got them killed. This could have gotten her killed had Zane wanted to kill her at that moment. She was blind because she did it with Tin. Then
Blind
she sees
and deaf and everything else.
Then she sees Breeze running from Set's army, and she's like, "I gotta save him. I can't clear that distance." And then she's like, feeling at her Duralumin, or could I? And it's like, Vin, have you ever made a jump like this before? Nope. Going in the air. Figure it out on the way down.
Gonna do it on the fly.
It's just one of those. This is a really bad idea, isn't it? Yep. All
yeah,
right,
but if I nail this, it's gonna look really cool, and it did. And she goes and she's pushing on the horse's iron shod.
Horseshoes.
Yeah, the horseshoes. Yeah. Why did iron shod? What the crap?
Iron shod.
Yeah.
Shod is the bird.
Yeah. Anyway, but the part that sealed it for me, and I'm like, Kelsier trained you, is she starts flying parallel to Breeze, who's on his horse. And Breeze looks down at her floating, and the horse looks down at her. That's sort of like, what the crap? And
it's like, you're not supposed to do that.
She looks up at Breeze, and she winks. And then she goes back. And I'm just like, you have the showmanship! You are Kelsier's girl!
Yep. Oh, she's got the gall.
Like, she tries to pretend she's just only, she's only this quiet predator, but every once in a while, she'll throw in a little flair that just lets you know, nah, I know the art that goes along with this.
Well, it's just, she's not just saving the world, she's having fun while she does it.
Oh,
yeah.
Oh no, that scene where she just starts messing around with Duralumin in battle for the first time, you're just like, okay, well, this is going to be fun. This is good.
Yeah. Well, it is just so incredibly reckless. But, again, and at the very beginning of the first book, what does she refer to Alametsi as? Her luck.
Yep.
And, oh my gosh, does she have
and
that
does she
in just
push it?
Buckets of...
She
because
does.
the heir of the survivor. She's inherited his luck.
The other thing that makes her a perfect heir for Kelsier is the fact that she grew up in thieving crews. Now, Kelsier was a very different type of thieving crew, but she grew up with the art of the con in mind, as opposed to the art of allomancy in mind. And Kelsier approached allomancy the same way. So in some ways, he really was the perfect teacher for her. Mm-hmm. Because he approached learning the same way she did. Yeah. She just is so much better at it naturally than he is. And started much younger.
Okay, so... Did you have something?
No, I was just agreeing.
Okay, so we've been talking about Vin and Kelsier. You can't really talk about Vin and Kelsier without talking about Zane in this book.
Yeah.
Because he kind of steps in to fill both Ellen's and Kelsier's roles. He's sort of a dark side for both of them, and he kind of plays with. In some ways, I almost see him as sort of trying to play the Phantom of the Opera with them, because he
does like to wear black too.
He's just sort of the whispering, "You need to come this way." They don't want you. He's been manipulating her from the very beginning, and and we find out even more than we ever thought right towards the end, but. Yeah. But okay, so Zane, he's he's Ellen's half brother. We know he's Straff's son.
One of his many children.
One of his many mistresses. He's the only Mistborn of Straff's children, though, which is the only reason that Straff keeps him around, because he's also clearly
just a little unhinged.
touched.
Looney
a
is
bit touched.
Yeah. More touched than we find. Okay, so let's talk about Zane. What stands out to each of y'all about him? You know, I mean,
the thing that stands out to me is, and something Brandon has talked about, is he is supposed to sort of represent that attraction Vin and Kelsier could have had if they had been more naturally like in the same age group.
Right.
And the thing that he really represents, and he does it in a simple, just physical way, he doesn't wear a mist cloak. Even though he's Mistborn, this is supposed to be the sign of his power, and he doesn't wear it. Why? He doesn't wear it, and he always says to Vin, it's like, why are you playing their games? And he sort of views that mist cloak as part of playing their games. And so in all honesty,
it's a sign, yes, but it's a sign in this specific culture.
And it's also, again, Zane's correct here, because the mist cloak in real life would just get caught on everything, and just as cool as it looks, it's just impractical. He at least follows Edna Mode's advice here with no capes.
Now, if we had, say, an Awakener with a mist cloak, that'd be kind of awesome.
That'd be so scary.
Don't tease me with what I want for the end of the Cosmere.
Guys, I'm thinking that we're going to see this with Hoyt at some point, because he's got everything. He is our avatar.
He doesn't have a lump. He doesn't have the shroud.
I'm not entirely certain he doesn't have at least some degree, because remember, his hair is shock white now.
Okay.
And so...
He doesn't have all of it, at least.
I'm not convinced. Okay, but anyway, back to Zane.
To Zane. So I've realized in media that I always seem to like bad boys, and I can't ever place exactly why. Even though I realize in real life, I step back and go, I would hate them.
What? No, your husband's a total bad boy. Have you seen how he codes? He doesn't leave comments at all. It's reckless.
There's a level of bad boy there.
We talk about
tell him to program with a leather jacket.
We talk about
a leather jacket, but it's elk, so not quite as interesting.
Actually, that's kind of more interesting because I don't know anybody who has elk.
It was his grandfather's. It doesn't look biker like though. So anyway.
he's a rough rider, sort of a.
He's a rebel for sure.
Rural type.
He does like sure. Rustic things, yes.
No,
he'd love a cabin.
But anyway, so you were talking about with liking bad boys. I mean, again, with Phantom of the Opera, the line is "Close your eyes and surrender to your darkest dream."
Oh, yeah, yeah, it's fitting. But I remember my first time reading it, I liked Zane a lot, and I don't know why. It was just, I think it's more of that bad boy attraction that I seem to have.
Well, he is an interesting character, and you never know what he's going to do, which is sort of fascinating.
But this time around, I didn't like him as much, especially because I knew his end game. And
you know where he's going.
And I'm sitting there going, yeah, you're just a little bit of a jerk, and you're kind of. He has a little bit of Straff's self-assurance in him, even though it's tweaked because he's got that voice in his head that's always saying, kill them, kill them, kill them, which I give him props for not killing everybody all the time, because that would start to really drive me crazy if that was in my head all the time, because I have little kids saying, mom, 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 or other things, or asking the same question over again, and I don't handle it as well as I should all the time, and I don't have them saying, kill. Versus that's what he has. Speaking
of that, did y'all recognize where, at least on this read through, where his spike is?
Yes.
And this is.
I don't know if I recognize it the first time.
I don't want to go too much into details because that's sort of going a little bit into spoilery for book 3. But
when it was mentioned this time, I was like, that's where it is.
Yeah, he mentions the cold lump in his heart, and that's
yeah. The other thing. So talking about the voice in his head. I think the thing that's interesting about him is he has a very clinical view of his insanity. Because he's just like, well, so I can't be trusted with this because I'm crazy. Because I hear voices in my head. That's the definition of crazy.
Person. Yeah.
Now, we find out later, he really does have voices in his head. So when it tells him he's not crazy, it's telling it from him from that very same clinical thing. You were never crazy. So so you sit there, you look at his life. He was abused, he was forgotten, then he was hidden, And he was raised by Straff, who is the worst parent in the world.
He's the worst person in the world.
Yeah, worst person in the Cosmere, frankly.
Yeah.
You can go through every other villain in every other one of his books. The only one who's even close to as deplorable is Sadius, and I'd still rather deal with Sadius.
Yeah.
And we still have no evidence of Sadius,
Sadius
He
is
loved his
ruthless.
wife, at least.
Yeah.
He loved his wife.
Sadius
So
is
something
ruthless. Straff is selfish.
Yeah, and so you sit there, you look at Zane. Okay, not a good situation. He has all of Elend, but without the
nice warm.
the nice warmth, the friends, the things that sort of tempered him. Mm-hmm. On top of it, he's a Mistborn, and they're all naturally just so cocky. Kelsier, Vin, all of them, they're all so cocky.
Sean, yeah.
I think there's a very interesting what if scenario where he doesn't have that voice in his head. Who does he turn out to be? If he doesn't have that voice constantly saying, kill, 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 kill at all times. Like, could have Vin and Ellen turn him around. But because he has that voice in his head, and he knows he's insane, because I have a voice in my head, he's like, I need to find someone who can fix me. It's not going to be Straff. Ellen's too idealistic. But he sees in Vin that same darkness, and that same desire to not be caged. Because Vin loves Ellen, and he sees that as her weakness. He's like, why do you let him control you? And the response is, I don't let him control me. But he doesn't understand that because he doesn't live in a world where people do things because of love.
He also doesn't live in a world of much free will.
No.
Yeah.
Because essentially everything he does is because Straff has told him to.
Yeah, it's the fact that he is messing with Straff, but at the same time, he relies on him. Because...
Well, and it says, even in his own sick, twisted way, he loves Straff because this is his father.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's a weird character, and it's so creepy the way... It's very internet stalkerish of him, where he's looking for this girl to fix him.
He keeps
Which
saying,
actually,
you were supposed to save me.
So there's always this theme, even in real life scenarios, where women will go after a broken guy and be like, I can fix him. And it's just kind of interesting that Sanderson took that and flipped it, that it's the guy who's chasing the girl going, you can fix me, you can fix me.
Yeah, I know guys who are like that. They have that attitude that I just need to find the right girl.
You were supposed to be my redemption.
And
I haven't run into that, thankfully.
No, because you're attracted to bad boys like your husband. And and so it's
for our listeners who don't know, her husband is one of the nicest guys in the world, and just helpful and friendly,
and rides a motorcycle and programs at the same time. But
he wants to ride a motorcycle, but now that he has kids, he's like, it's a little risky.
While playing the electric guitar with his teeth.
Yeah, come on. Please share this part of the podcast with him. Anyway,
that's an acoustic.
To be fair, he did destroy an entire universe in that one campaign we all played.
Yes, he did.
And he did that. He released
by accident.
No.
Okay, so back to Zane though.
But yeah, no. Okay. So it was interesting. Just I found him to sort of be the anti-Kelsier, very not anti-Kelsier, but the bizarro Kelsier. Kelsier in a slightly different situation. This is who he could have been, and how dangerous and dark that is.
Speaking of which, so at one point, you talk about how the self-control he's got for not going through and murdering everyone around him. There was one night where he and Vin decide to go on a little
murder spree
adventure.
But even that was controlled, because he didn't do it just for the heck of it. It was,
there was a reason. And
don't get me wrong. He liked being letting himself off the chain, but even that had a purpose. He is still a venture. And the one thing we see with all three ventures, they're very calculating.
Yes, they're very driven and calculating. But again, the attack on Keep Venture, it was his attempt to just completely, basically take Vin past the point.
You mean Keep Hastings with Seth?
Keep Hastings.
Was,
yeah, Keep Hastings. Sorry about that. Yes, but it was his attempt to push Vin over the edge, essentially the point of no return.
Yeah.
And he, they get to Set, where he's there, and
Set and his kid.
And so you have, and essentially, what do you have? You have a ruthless leader, but when it comes down to it, you have a cripple and his young son.
Which, okay, I love the paranoia of Vin, where she's convinced that Set has a Mistborn.
She's like, what is the Mistborn? It's him,
and it's clearly Set because he's crippled. Because he's crippled.
Well,
that's the proof. The lack of proof is the evidence.
She doesn't really know Set.
No.
And she thinks, the only way he would even come and do this is if he has a Mistborn on his side. Mm-hmm. When, in all actuality, this is Set's desperate gamble.
Yeah, that's the part she doesn't get.
He's lost his dominance. He doesn't have control of his city.
Well, and it's something that she won't understand, because that's a court game. Because if she had been in desperate situations like that with her brother, where when the going gets tough, they pack up, leave, and they start over. Whereas Set is trying to remain relevant.
Except that it's not a court game, because Set's from the rural dominances. He's not he's not in a Luthadel noble.
No, but it's still a court game. Like he doesn't play it the same way they do. He's still trying to preserve his power. He couldn't ever just let go of the game. Mm-hmm. Which is a problem with the nobles, is they always want to play the game, and it never stops.
But he also sees it more as a game than some of the others.
That's
so one of my
weird.
favorites at the end, when the option is given to him, basically step down or die. That he basically tries to turn it around on Vin. He's just like, do you think that Ellen would ever bow to this kind of pressure? And I love her response is just, you aren't half the man that Ellen is. Don't try to pretend you are.
And he likes it.
He just sort of leans back, he grins, and he's like, get me down from this horse, so that he can kneel and swear fealty. I'm just okay.
He loves it.
Set is just such an interesting character.
I love that he loves it. He's just like, oh, that's a good play. I'm not even mad. I'm just impressed.
Yeah, because that's the thing is, again, he makes very desperate and bold plays, daring people to contradict him. That his attack on Luthadel was that when he went into the when he went in with a very small entourage, snuck into the assembly.
Yeah.
And then suddenly he's there, and he's like, I'm going to try and get voted in as king.
I'm in your base, bribing your dudes.
Using your rules against you.
Yep.
I'm a noble. I'm eligible. Vote for me. I mean, this guy hadn't done any good. This guy's trying to kill you. Why not?
I'm here to bribe you.
Option 3.
Set is awesome. And by extension, his daughter.
Oh, yeah. That pink thing.
First off, I love Vin's first response, which she just goes by, and Vin just comes in confused. What was that pink thing that just ran by me?
It was the blur of pink. That was...
Yeah. Which is funny, because she wasn't wearing pink. She was wearing red.
And I think Breeze was like, it's actually red. And Breeze, I think it's Breeze. And Breeze cares, because he's the one...
And Vin's just like, no. I don't care what color it was. That was pink. Because she's this puffball of
giddiness and just
she's Glinda from Wicked.
We can't mention her without the fact that when he ran from the army, Ham made the offhand joke, "What did you do? Bet his daughter?" And then she shows up calling him Breezy, and it's like Dachshund, Ham, and Clubs. They all look at Breeze. They're
all in the back, and they're like, "Did you know?"
They're just like, "What the crap? I was kidding. This is way better."
And that's the other thing is I love just how bad of a hard time they give him, and he's just like, please, I'm trying, because Breeze, bless his heart, he is trying to do the honorable thing. He's actually not trying to do anything, and she just will not let him go.
That's the other thing that's really cool about the relationship. First, from a mechanical standpoint, we finally get to see how rioting works.
Mm-hmm. This is the first rider we actually see.
Yeah, because everyone else, it's either been Mistborn or otherwise. And I think at one point she riots calm, and it blows my mind. And
it's like that shouldn't work.
Well, and then you realize, it's because I'm thinking of the words literally, not what they the
not
actual
the terminology
ability
here.
But the other thing, it's the fact that Breeze always keeps himself very composed, very in control of himself and the situation around him. Mm-hmm. And he falls for a girl who's half his age, essentially. And it's...
Literally.
And it's because she is pushing on all his inhibitions. And she's like doing it. She enjoys him for the challenge of trying to get him to move because he's so in control. And
I think she probably likes him too.
Oh yeah,
she definitely likes him.
Well, but it's we've talked about.
But you guys it just sounds like you guys are making it that she just wants the challenge.
No. That's what attracts her to him.
Yeah, I do think that's the attraction.
He is this strong person, and she's just like. And she's attracted to that strength, but she still wants to sort of test it.
Yeah.
Tweak it.
The other thing we see it when she marches back into her dad's camp, and she's like, "All right, Daddy, let's get the army going. Time to go." And he's like, "No."
Like, we're going home. It's over. And she's just like, "Okay, fine. Then
you can save me over there.
If you want to protect me, you're gonna have to charge."
And just. She's just as impetuous as the rest of the crew. She fits right in.
She is wonderful.
And what is it like? She shows up with a random gang of like bandits or whatever.
Yeah.
And he's like, "No, more of them. I don't want more bandits in my camp."
She's like, "But they're protecting me."
It's great. They were wonderful.
She collects people.
But the thing that I find interesting about we discussed Vin and Ellen's and Zane's relationship, and that the
weird sort of semi-triangle.
Yeah.
I don't know. Whatever it is,
the Tindwyl Sazed relationship, and now we have the very emotional Breeze and Elrianne relationship.
That's true.
But none of these relationships that he holds up as these are functional relationships. None of them are based on the physicality of it, even though it's very clear that her and Breeze's relationship does have
there's a physical aspect.
There's a physical aspect to it. But he shows that it's like the things that make work in these relationships and make them work has nothing to do with the physical. That's just maybe a component. It's this
which is
other
so
thing.
refreshing.
And the few times that Vin. Sorry.
No,
anyway,
go ahead.
With Vin, when she does have physical, and it's not even like scandalous physical. It's like getting hugs from Elend and different things like that. Just like physical contact that's just comforting, not overtly sexual. I mean, like they do mention kissing, but it's not how you would usually expect romance to work in a lot of books.
Well, it's so refreshing in a lot of modern media. A relationship, like two people are together, and then two people spend time, and it's will they, won't they, and then suddenly they have sex and everything, and then it's just like that's the relationship, and it drives me crazy because suddenly that. It's driven the concept that all relationships, the most important and sometimes the only aspect that really, really matters is sex. And I'm just like, I'm sorry. There is so much deeper than that. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, I'm not, not to say that that's not important in a relationship at some point, but that's not the only aspect. That's not what makes a relationship. It's an aspect, but it's not the entirety of it.
And the thing that's interesting about the Breeze and Elrianne one is, like, in Vin and Elend and in Sazed and Tindwyl, we see how opposites attract. In Sazed and Elrianne, they're both, even though they're both very boisterous, they're both always in control of whatever situation
Sazed
they
and
get.
Elrianne?
Or, sorry, Breeze and Elrianne.
I was going to say, that's a relationship I missed.
Yeah. There's a fanfic.
There's
somewhere.
a deleted scene. So.
But
there's some fan fiction, It's
somewhere. Everyone ships everyone. But
I'm sure it's
but it's interesting because they're both very much in control of their situations, and they've been attracted to the person who they can't quite bowl over. And it's almost like that's what they like in the relationship is this is someone who is their equal.
It's sort of like Breeze's relationship with Clubs, his friendship. that develops, because when they first meet in the first book,
Clubs hates him.
Clubs doesn't even want to be in the same room, make his decision while Breeze is in the same room.
Even though he's
he
immune.
is a copper cloud and is immune to emotional elemency, he says it's more than just elemency. They manipulate with every aspect of themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And then it comes back around, and in this book, there's an awesome scene between Clubs and Breeze.
There's a couple, actually.
But I'm talking about the one where they're sitting down to have a drink together.
Yeah, that one's such a good scene.
Mm-hmm. And it's just because Breeze feels a more real connection, because it happens so instinctively with him that he's manipulating everybody around him. I mean, we see from his viewpoint perspectives that he's always doing it, to the point where he recognizes, I don't know that I can stop this. I mean, Breeze is he's a savant.
Yeah.
And to the point where he's always doing it. And when he's around Clubs, he knows that Clubs is genuine.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's the one person he can get an honest opinion from.
Mm-hmm.
And on the other side, Clubs has grown to appreciate being around Breeze, because Breeze is someone who can see through a bit of Club's exterior.
Mm-hmm.
And he's honest about it.
He calls him out on a few things.
Yeah.
Like when he talks about I can't remember what he asks him about, but he says something in it. It surprises Clubs. I don't remember what it was.
I think, wasn't it? They were discussing like how he's always he's such a pessimist, and Breeze calls him out.
It was the fact that he's an artist.
Yeah,
was that Breeze that calls?
Well, Sazed calls him out on.
Sazed calls him out.
Sazed's trying to preach a religion to him,
and he gives him the coin.
But yeah, he calls Clubs out that he's an artist, not just a soldier, because everybody sees this gruff leader and this soldier and this general, and Sazed sees an artist.
He's like, I saw your carpentry.
I've seen your work.
There's more to you than just being a general.
I love that.
Yeah, that's such a good, and we'll get more into the battle probably next week, but with the Koloss banging at the door and Clubs and Breeze just sitting there chatting, and they're just like, this is all Kelsier's fault. This is all his fault. We were just thieves. And I just love them just
he's responsible.
Yeah, and they're just like, damn him.
Uh-oh, we're going to have to put a tag on this episode.
I think we'll be fine. No, I love that. And then Doxson has a similar one. Speaking of people opening up, we haven't even touched the Khandra plot, but when Vin's running around trying to figure out who the Khandra is, and her scene with Doxson, where she starts using emotional allomancy to see if he's the one, since Orsur tells her, hey, you don't, we're not susceptible to that, so if they can be soothed, they're not the one. Right. And so she starts trying to make him more honest, and he opens up about just how much he hates the nobles.
Yep.
And
just rages.
Yeah, and it's
not full rage, but cold rage.
Yeah, and he's just honest with her, and he's like, I can't get over that. And he's like, and I can't help but feel that Kelsier, if he knew that we put this on, that he would, he'd kill me for doing it. And he's like,
and it's interesting knowing what happens in Secret History too.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
But then when Doxson's essentially, when he's about to die later on in the battle, and he starts going through mentally, just like, our problem was follow through. We didn't follow through, and he starts going through thinking like, had we followed through? And he goes through essentially what Ellen said would have happened had they killed the nobles, and he mentally works through it, and he just comes to the conclusion that had they followed through, like, we would have lost our souls and we would have gained nothing.
Right.
And and he sort of releases himself where he sort of finally comes to terms with it and can forgive himself for doing it. I thought it was a really cool scene.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. All right, so on that note, I think we might want to start winding down. There's a lot that we haven't covered yet, but we'll so we'll definitely do another episode on this.
Yeah.
We haven't gone into the Khandra.
We haven't gone into
the Three Armies
prophecies.
strategies, the prophecies.
Three Armies.
Basically,
Yeah.
the mystical aspects, especially. There's a lot to cover still. So.
There's one more thing I want to discuss while we have
What's
the
that?
time.
Okay.
The Three Armies. The first book, we got a lot of court politics, but not really theory and how to game the system. It was more just been at parties. This one was true political theory, and in particular, the whole idea of when Straff was there, they had a problem. When Set was there, they gained an opportunity. And suddenly they got into, Bill loves this term, game theory, of the fact that there's three armies, and suddenly the weakest party has a huge advantage that wouldn't normally be there. And they start having to try and play both ends against the middle.
Especially because it's two essentially equal armies. And so they just say, oh, we can tip the balance for one of these or the other.
Yeah, and it's something that Elend adds to the crew that's very interesting in these theories, because he's a theoretician, and this is where he shines. And I think it's where a lot of the crew suddenly starts to develop respect for him, is trying to figure out how to negotiate between these three armies. And it adds a level of intrigue on a political level that I found very interesting, where they're trying to play a very different type of game.
Yep.
He's also been receiving some of the training from Tyndall by this point too, so he's getting more self-assured and presenting himself better as well. And he changes his wardrobe too, which makes it's funny how people like pause and they're like, "Oh, that looks good on you," or I guess he scares a soldier when he first sees him, and he's like, "Oh, it looks totally different."
The thing about as a cosplayer, you probably recognize that, because when you're wearing a different outfit, you carry yourself differently.
Oh yeah, I even went to a panel or two about how they're like, if you really want to do a really good cosplay and totally get into the character, you have to think about how you move your hips. And do you lead with your chest? Do you lead with your hips? Do you lead with this? How you move and everything else. And my one set of armor, which is like armor and metal plates in between leather and stuff, it forces me to sit differently and keep my shoulders back, because it has these big shoulder things on it. And I get really tired because I slouch a lot, but I felt more powerful in that, even though no one recognized me. But I mean, I was still like, yeah, I feel kind of hardcore that I'm here in metal armor and I'm
it's
hardcore.
just
it changes how you feel about it. And I'm wearing a really pretty dress, I'm like, I feel all feminine and whatever else, and different stuff like that. It totally flips heightism, and then when I'm being tough and mostly barefoot, I'm kind of like, yeah, whatever. Because that's just tough.
There is something to the saying, clothes make the man.
Yeah. Well, and I found it very interesting in that scene where she's working on his look, where he's like, don't touch the hair.
Like, the hair is off limits.
Yeah. And then she's like, all right. And they pull out the mirror, and he's like, take the hair. And just
take the hair. It just doesn't work anymore.
Yeah, he's like, it just doesn't work. You're right. And I like that from him, where it's like he suddenly sees what Tyndall's point is.
What she's been doing this whole time.
And from there on out, he always makes a point to wear white in an ash-stained world. And just the symbol of that, and what it shows, that this man takes care of this detail. And it lets people think that he'll take care of other details later. It's a lot like Brandon putting small details to make you feel like the entire world has been fleshed out. Because this detail is there.
It's interesting because the Lord Ruler wore black.
Yes. But
and so
black
by
and
wearing black, he made it seem like, the ash was irrelevant. But with Elend wearing white, he made it seem like the ash couldn't touch him. And it's not just I am unbothered by the ash. It's I am above the ash.
The other thing it does is when there is blood, boy, is that stark.
Yep.
Yeah, well, that happens later. So next time we'll want to dive into the Khandra. We're gonna want to look at the Church of the Survivor. We're gonna want to look at just there's a bunch of stuff that we still haven't. Quan, all of the prophecies. What the heck is going on in the Well of Ascension?
I think we should probably start off with the prophecies next time.
Yeah.
Since that's what drives the plot a lot.
We also didn't talk about Elend and Vin's not communicating thing too. But
right.
Yeah.
No, there's
that's
so
okay.
much.
They
we
didn't
may,
either.
If it happens, we may end up going into 3 episodes on this one. Hopefully we'll be able to get it in 2, just because we want to cover. There's still a lot to cover, but if it comes down to it, we can stretch it out.
We want to put content before the need to move on.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And then we haven't even mentioned Hoyd, so we'll talk about that as well.
That's okay. The book didn't either.
Yeah. Anyway, we'll talk about that later. So before we go, do y'all have any final thoughts before we sign out?
I really, really wanted to make a foam Kolas sword, but it didn't happen. I was so sad that I didn't manage to do that. But maybe I'll see if I can manage to do that, because my daughter's going to have a big chunk of time with no school. So maybe I can be like, okay, kids are going to play the backyard. I'm going to shape some foam.
Yeah, Kolas sword, I think.
It may only end up being this big, because a full-size one is really, really big.
Kolas sword, I either imagine the Buster sword from Final Fantasy VII, or that big hunkin' sword from Rurouni Kenshin that what's his bucket's got.
Sanosuke.
Yeah.
Sagara Sonosuke.
The Zanbato. Look it up if you don't know what we're talking about.
Those words.
It's huge. I think I'm going to do it off some fan art or something that I saw if I do it. So.
My final thought is this. I loved this book so much more the second time than I did the first time, because this is one where knowing motivations completely changes characters, even characters you liked. It completely changes how you view them.
Yes,
and it adds so much depth to the story.
Oh, speaking of which, also next time we'll probably dive a little bit into Mistborn secret history, just the stuff that coincided with this, and that changes things too. So,
but with that one, because that one is very far, we will give a spoiler warning before we
try and do that
jump
towards the
into
end.
those.
Definitely. So, all right, Amy, any final thoughts
about the book or?
Yep. About the book? Yeah, we'll talk about personal projects in a bit.
Love triangles get old fast.
That's true.
I've read way too many YA novels, and that aspect I was like, oh, can we stop?
Plus, it's just sort of backwards from my entire life experience. How many times in my life has there really been 2 people going after one person? It's more like, man, I can't pair off with anyone.
And it wasn't it wasn't even a full love triangle. Again, yes, there is Vin, Elend, and Zane, but Vin and Elend had their own 2-person love triangle, just working on their own without Zane involved anyway. So that was all sorts of interesting.
We weren't a fan of that. That lasted like...
It made me flash back to my teenage years, and I was like, oh, I don't want to go back to that angst. No, thank you.
For me, I am so excited to talk about... I'm not going to say specifics, just the Khandra. That whole plot... Specifically, or Sir, I was so proud. Excited to talk about.
I spotted something earlier because I knew it was coming, and I was like, "Oh, I'm so proud of myself."
No, because in this book, he becomes one of my absolute favorite characters in the entire series. So I'm looking forward to talking about that. So, all right, so as always, we want to thank our patrons who support the show at patreon.com/Cosmere Studies. By becoming a patron, you get access to bonus content like the 6-7, a collection of 7 pieces of content we find each week. We talked about this a little bit earlier. We just want to share it with you, just something fun to share. You'll also get early access to any bonus shows that we produce, automatic entry into any giveaways we have, and more. But most importantly, you help us to build the show. With the help of our patrons, we're hoping to expand the show, grow it, improve things, record more frequent episodes, and also improve the quality of the show with better microphones, lighting, other equipment, and hopefully make things better. Before we go, we've each got personal projects. Myself, I typically write board games over at the Innkeeper's Table at www.innkeeperstable.com. I most recently finished a a review of a game called Dice Forge, which has become one of Jordan's favorites because the design is amazing. So go over there, check that out. I'll also be doing another one of a game called Takenoko, in which you're growing bamboo to feed the most adorable little panda figurine you've ever seen. But if you want to check this out, you go to www.innkeeperstable.com or follow me on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram at innkeeperstable. Jordan, how about you? What have you got going on?
Well, I normally push the Saturday Morning XCOM here on my Twitch channel, but I'm actually going to push. If you like Nintendo Super Smash Brothers, and you like the amiibos that they do, I'm going to be hosting in the next month an amiibo tournament, team tournament. We'll put a link somewhere in the notes to the rules for it, but you basically send them to me, and Team Attack is on, and while these things are monsters, when humans fight them, when they fight each other, they start making questionable decisions.
It is amazing.
It's amazing how... It's a great cure if you're worried about the robot apocalypse. This helps stave off some of that fear. But if you're someone who has amiibos and likes that part, I'm looking for participants, so get in contact with me.
And we'll send you a way to do that. All right, Amy, how about you? What do you got going on right now?
I'm doing way too many projects. That's my problem. So I am Coincidence Cosplay, or Coincidence Cos on Twitter, but otherwise it's Coincidence Cosplay on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and Vero, though I'm not as active on there. But I'm doing 3D printing. I'm trying to do foam work. I'm doing a Mass Effect costume, which has part of my rifle. This is only like a teeny section of it. I don't know if you can see it. Anyway, but it's giant. So I'm doing that, and I'm doing a Star-Lord costume finishing up, and I'm trying to get talked into now doing Lady Tremaine from Cinderella, which is the So yeah,
that's going to take some interesting wig work.
Did you say trying to get talked into?
Yeah, I don't know how to word it. Anyway, because I realize I scare small children with my Toph costume because I have the white eyes, and that makes them nervous.
And Lady Tremaine's not going to make children nervous.
No.
I like the evil queen from. I can look imperious and whatever else, and I have normal eyes then. So I'm
Lady Tremaine is one of the scariest Disney villains out there, in my opinion.
I know. Anyway, but the person who's trying to talk me into it, she does the evil from Snow White all the time, and she's like, "You should be another villain with us," because they have like everybody, but her is like one of the main ones, and I'm like, I could maybe do that one.
I've got a Captain Hook coat if you want to borrow it. So.
Well, there's already a Captain Hook, and you have to stick with the right gender. So,
okay.
Because otherwise, I'm like, yeah, I totally would do all these other things, because I would totally do my Star-Lord, but I'm the wrong gender. So. So anyway, cool. I'm doing lots of stuff.
All right. Well, if you've enjoyed the show, we'd love it if you would give us a 5-star review on iTunes. It's one of the best ways you can support us because it helps more listeners to find us and to build the community around the show. Also, make sure to share the podcast and our videos with other Brandon Sanderson fans that you know. In addition to the live episodes of the show that stream on twitch.tv/innkeeperstable, every 2 weeks on Monday nights at 8:30 p.m. Mountain Time, 7:30 p.m. Pacific Time, listeners can also find our videos on YouTube or the audio versions of the podcast on iTunes, Google Play, and just about any other service that carries podcasts by searching for Cosmere Studies. You can also follow us and contact us through Twitter and Instagram under the profile @Cosmere Studies. We want to hear from you, so tell us what you think of the show. Tell us what your favorite moments in the books are, and let us know of any theories that you have, crackpot theories, crazy theories, aluminum hat theories, about just what Brandon's got planned for the future of the Cosmere. You can email us at cosmerestudies@gmail.com, as well as contact us on our social media accounts or in the comments section of our videos on YouTube. That wraps up another week here at the Sandersonian Institute. So on behalf of Amy, Jordan, and myself, thanks for watching, and remember, there's always another secret.